Hi everyone, and welcome to this patch update for Filament. There is one main thing that we've added in this that is designed to open up the Filament workflow for as many users as possible. And that is, we have implemented access to MIDI ports inside of Filament. So now, when you go to MIDI Destination, you can use the host MIDI output as before. Now that is like that comes through your DAW as a plugin MIDI output, and you can configure directly connecting from the plugin itself. But also, as you can see at the bottom, we now have the ability to access existing ports that are loaded up on your machine. What this means is users on Ableton and some of the other DAWs that don't support direct MIDI out of plugins quite as effectively now have a way of routing directly out of Filament into their instruments across their setup. So accompanying this, we have a small helper application that you can either use the ports that you already have on your setup, or you can run the Filament MIDI Port Manager, and that does not have a window or anything. It simply runs up here at the top of your screen, and you can just change the number of ports that it has open. You can restart them, you can quit. It's very, very simple application. It's not going to clutter up your desktop. But you can see I've just opened that, and it defaults to setting up 4 ports. You can have up to 8, and if we go into here, you can now see Filament Out 2, 3, and 4. So you can then have basically, 8 by 16 instruments running out of Filament, which is beyond the 64 that you can. And I'll just show you how we set this up. So in your instance of Filament, you go in here, MIDI Destination, external ports, Filament Out. Let's do just channel 1. And this differs from instrument to instrument, but in Logic, you can go onto your track and you can set the MIDI input to be running from Filament Out here. And if I just click monitor on that and go back to my main Filament, you can see that it is driving that zebra track. So the MIDI is coming out of Filament into the system MIDI ports and then through to a different track. Now, I want to mention something structurally in the way that you guys use Filament, because if you use MIDI ports as opposed to host MIDI out, you will get a slightly different experience. So using MIDI ports, you're likely to have slightly increased latency, and also there's slightly less flexibility when it comes to using multiple instances of Filament. Because if you use multiple instances of Filament and they're all set to use Filament Out 1, for instance, then they will all try and use that port and will end up using the same instrument. That's where the advantage of using the host MIDI output comes in, because it's connected and embedded within the plugin. So if you just duplicate the plugin, you have a whole different set of channels. The reason why we've decided to include MIDI ports is there are certain DAWs in which this is the only way to get a direct performance of Filament out of Filament. And I'm not talking about dragging and dropping, which is another workflow that you can use in Filament. And specifically, the main one of these is Ableton, which is not so good at handling this host MIDI output. So if your priority is flexibility and portability, okay, the best setup is to use Filament for everything. Host the plugins, mix it, perform your orchestrations, and take the audio out. You can have a multi-output. It is a multi-output plugin, so you can then take the audio out to different stems and things like that if you need to. So that's the fastest in terms of CPU, in terms of latency, and in terms of portability between projects. The second fastest is to use host MIDI out, okay, but it does require your setup to be able to be compatible with that. So this is more reliable and and will have lower latency because it all occurs within the DAW system. And then finally, this is the most flexible, okay, so using the ports, but it requires a greater degree of kind of template management, and it introduces more latency because the MIDI is running out of your DAW into the system's MIDI setup and then back into your DAW. So it kind of adds a round robin. So there is definitely lots of use cases out there for MIDI ports, but what I would say is probably if you can set up your template using Host MIDI Out first of all, then do so. But if you need more flexibility or more power, then you can go to using the port system. For Windows users, there's a very, very similar application to this in Windows. It's called the same thing, and it just runs in your notification section at the bottom, and it has pretty much an identical menu to that. This is going out as a beta feature. We've just implemented it, and I'm sure there will be some things that need tweaking and working on. So anything that you guys come across while you're testing this out, please feedback to us and we will get it sorted as soon as possible. Right, so that's the big thing for patch 1.1.3. The next thing is a much kind of smaller little fix, and that is when you drag and drop MIDI from an instance. So those of you may already know this, you can record MIDI within Filament and then drag and drop it out, and it's recording the orchestrated MIDI, not the input MIDI. So I have got, give me a sec. All right, so I've got a violin here, just really simple violin, chamber strings. It's a bit quiet, let's push it up. And now, if you press play in your DAW, this was already a feature. You can record the orchestrated MIDI. You'll see this down here turns red for recording. Okay, and then you simply drag and drop it onto a track. And previously, the issue was that the CC was not being recorded and dropped onto the track, and that is now sorted. So thank you to the users that pointed that out. Okay, thirdly, little tiny detail things is if you are in the build and you're looking at the collections of orchestrations up here, we now have a visible selectable drag bar, and the same in the mixer when you're dealing with more than 5 tracks. Okay, so really small little things. But some people don't have horizontal scroll. I use horizontal scroll, so that makes it easy. But if you don't, you can just now select the horizontal scroll bar. Okay, and so aside from that, there are a few other stability fixes in place to help us kind of improve any little crashes, things like that. Keep the reports coming, keep the feedback coming. We will do everything we can to get all of your feature requests into the plugin over time. So yeah, please keep engaging with us and letting us know. Sorry about that flashing up something in the background. I will see you at the next patch update. This one is likely to be in 2 weeks because I'm away on holiday next week. So I will see you then. Enjoy Filament in the meantime. Cheers. Bye.